A simple man lost his job after saving the life of 10-year-old girl hit by bullet. Next day, he got presidential invite. John Miller was an unremarkable man by most standards, a janitor in a quiet neighborhood school in Texas, known more for his kind smile than anything heroic. That changed one afternoon when chaos erupted near the school playground. A stray bullet from a gang-related shootout tore through the air, headed straight for a 10-year-old girl frozen in fear. Without thinking, John lunged forward, pulling her to the ground and shielding her with his own body. The bullet grazed his shoulder, but the girl was unharmed. But that moment, sudden, violent, and unforgettable, was not how John's story began. Before we move further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for heartwarming stories like this. Likewise, tell us where you are watching from in the comment below. It began, as it always did, with the soft trill of an alarm clock and the slow rise of a man who'd never asked for much in life. John lived alone in a small, weathered apartment in Texas above a corner store. His world was quiet, modest, predictable, the kind of life that rarely drew notice but held more dignity than most ever saw. Each morning, he awoke before the sun, his first task a ritual, feeding Whiskers, the grumpy old cat who tolerated affection only on her terms. While she chewed lazily at her bowl, John ironed his work shirt, blue, frayed at the cuffs, but always neatly pressed. By 6, he was out the door, his lunchbox in one hand, a thermos of lukewarm coffee in the other. The city hadn't fully stirred yet, and he liked it that way. The stillness suited him. It gave him time to think, though he rarely thought of himself. Instead, he noticed things. The mailman who limped on his right leg, the neighbor who watered her plants with the same humming tune every day, the cracks in the sidewalk that spelled out stories no one bothered to read. At the corner, near the old bus stop bench, sat Marvin. Some called him a drifter. John never did. He knew Marvin by name, knew he'd once played jazz piano in bars that no longer existed, and that he liked his coffee with too much sugar. Most mornings, John handed him half a sandwich and stayed a moment to listen. Not out of pity, but out of habit, respect, and something like friendship. At school, John slipped through hallways like a breeze, present but rarely noticed. He kept the floors clean, the lights working, the leaks patched. He fixed what others broke and stayed long after everyone else had gone home. He liked it that way. There was a peace in being useful. The children loved him, though they didn't always say it. He was the one who handed out Band-Aids when knees were scraped, who found lost jackets, who knew how to make the water fountain spurt higher just to make the littlest kids laugh. He remembered birthdays. He remembered which kids were shy and which ones just needed someone to believe they were brave. John called every teacher sir or ma'am, even the new ones. He never missed a staff meeting, though he wasn't required to attend. He swept with rhythm, hummed under his breath, and carried in his eyes the kind of quiet sadness that only people who had lost something carry, and yet, he smiled more than most. He took his lunch in the supply room, usually a peanut butter sandwich, sometimes a leftover from last night's humble dinner. On most days, he read old mystery novels, dog-eared and well-loved, just to keep his mind sharp. He didn't own a smartphone, didn't care much for politics, and had no idea how many people walked past him thinking he was invisible. But there were some who saw him. Lily, for example. Lily was 10, full of questions and mischief. Her hair was always tangled, her socks never matched, and her backpack carried more candy wrappers than books. She liked John because he never rushed her, never scolded her for running in the hallway, and always gave her a warm, "Hey, kiddo," like she was the best part of his day. She would sometimes sit with him after recess, asking about how vacuums worked or if he believed in aliens. He always answered, even if he had to make something up just to see her smile. The playground was her kingdom. It was the place John liked best, too. Not because he played on it, but because he liked watching children be free. He would stand at the edge, broom in hand, pretending to tidy the area while keeping an eye on everyone. Especially Lily. Not because she needed it, but just in case. There was always that just in case. And on that particular afternoon, as laughter echoed across the pavement and jump ropes slapped rhythmically against the ground, John found himself once again near the playground. The sun was high, the sky was clear, and nothing felt out of place. Yet something subtle and strange made him pause. A sound, perhaps. A silence between giggles. A shift in the wind. He didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. Recess was the loudest part of the day. Shouts and laughter bounced off walls and across the open schoolyard like music from a forgotten summer. The sun stood high, casting playful shadows as children raced each other to the monkey bars and gathered in messy lines for kickball. Lily was in the middle of it all. Her mismatched socks peeked from worn sneakers as she skipped around a chalk-drawn hopscotch grid. She was grinning, wide, unbothered, as if the world had no edge sharp enough to touch her. John Miller leaned against the side of the building, a mop in one hand, a soft smile in his eyes. He wasn't working in that moment, not really. He was watching, the way an old tree watches the wind, quiet, steady, knowing. The seconds that followed began like any other. A ball bounced too far. A whistle blew. A teacher shouted a name. Then pop. It was faint at first, distant, almost dismissible. Another pop, closer now. A sound that didn't belong. Not in a playground filled with children. For a moment, there was confusion. Heads turned. Teachers tensed. One child laughed, thinking it was a firecracker. But John didn't laugh. The third sound wasn't a pop. It was a crack, sharp, fast, wrong. Then came a scream. In the span of a breath, everything unraveled. Children scattered. Some ran toward the school, others ducked behind benches or froze in place, unsure of what fear was supposed to look like. Chaos swept the yard in a heartbeat. Lily stood in the middle of it all, frozen, eyes wide, mouth open, paralyzed not by the noise, but by the terror pressing down like a wave. John saw her, just her. In that instant, nothing else mattered. He didn't hesitate. The world slowed to a crawl as he sprinted forward. His legs, stiff from age and years of quiet work, moved faster than they had in decades. Every step thundered with purpose. One thought burned behind his eyes: get to her. The bullet came before he reached her. He didn't see it, but he felt it. Not the bullet itself, just the air change. A shift in pressure. A warning that came too late for most men, but not for John. He threw himself over Lily. One arm wrapped around her, the other braced for impact. His body curved, a human shield against the unknown. The bullet ripped past, grazing his shoulder with a searing kiss of heat. Blood bloomed instantly, dark against his pale shirt, but John didn't fall. Not yet. Lily trembled beneath him. She hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, hadn't screamed. She didn't need to. Others were screaming now. Whistles blew frantically. Someone shouted for everyone to get down. More children cried, called for their parents, clung to teachers and friends as the chaos surged and swelled like a storm with no center. John held Lily close, whispering something only she heard. Something small, something calm. Maybe her name. Maybe just, "You're okay." Then the sirens came. First distant, then louder, piercing. The schoolyard flooded with uniforms. Police shouted commands. Teachers pointed toward the alley where the sounds had come from. Medics rushed in. John didn't move until someone touched his shoulder and told him it was over. Blood dripped from his sleeve. Pain pulsed through his arm, hot and rhythmic. He blinked slowly, trying to stay upright. His breath caught as he looked at Lily. She clung to him now. Her fingers dug deep into his shirt like she was afraid the world would pull her away again. He gave her a nod, just a little one, and then allowed the medics to guide him onto the stretcher. They asked questions he didn't fully hear. Something about how many shots, whether he could feel his fingers. He tried to answer, but the weight of everything pressed down too hard, and his words came out as murmurs. Lily didn't leave his side until a teacher knelt beside her and gently led her away. The sirens didn't stop. Neither did the whispers. Teachers, parents, and first responders exchanged wide-eyed looks. Children stared through windows and fences. Someone said they saw it all. Another pulled out a phone. A few recorded shaky videos, half lost in the blur of panic. In the distance, the police had cordoned off the alley. Yellow tape wrapped around the schoolyard like a wound dressing a city that bled far too often. But in that small corner of chaos, one thing remained certain. A man had moved. A girl had lived. And though few understood the full shape of what had just happened, something undeniable had taken root in every witness. John Miller, the janitor with the quiet smile, had done something extraordinary. And nothing would be quite the same again. Pain has a strange way of settling in, slowly, like fog. John Miller felt it not just in his shoulder, where the bullet had kissed him, but deeper, somewhere harder to name. The hospital had released him earlier that morning. A clean bandage over the wound. A bottle of painkillers in a brown paper bag. Instructions to rest. Though rest was a difficult thing when the world refused to be still. The walk up the stairs to his apartment felt longer than usual. His body moved like it was made of someone else's bones. Each step a reminder that the last 48 hours hadn't been a dream. The silence inside greeted him like an old friend, though it carried a strange edge now. Everything looked the same. His couch, his lamp, Whiskers asleep on the windowsill, but nothing felt the same. He sank into the chair by the window and closed his eyes. Across town, his name was being spoken on news stations, radio shows, and message boards. Janitor saves girl in school shooting scare. The brave custodian who shielded a child. Headlines bloomed like wildflowers. None of them felt real to John. He hadn't done it to be heroic. He'd simply moved. His phone rang. The screen showed the school's number. For a fleeting second, he smiled, expecting a call of thanks, or maybe concern. But the voice that answered was tight, practiced, almost apologetic. "Mr. Miller," the administrator began. "First, we want to acknowledge how grateful we are. Truly, what you did was beyond brave." There was a pause. "But the board has reviewed the situation, and we've been advised by legal counsel that due to liability concerns, we'll need to terminate your position effective immediately." John blinked. He thought he'd misheard. "Wait," he said, slowly, carefully, as if the right words might reverse time. "You're firing me?" A breath on the other end. Then a softened version of yes. "For liability," the voice repeated, as though the word explained everything. The call ended before John could speak again. He sat there, phone still in hand, staring into nothing. It wasn't just disbelief, it was a kind of grief. Not the sharp kind that came with loss, but the dull, aching type that comes from betrayal. For 22 years, he'd worked in that school. Quietly, without complaint. Fixing broken pipes. Walking scared kids to the nurse's office. Repainting chipped playground rails. Showing up on time. Staying late. And now he was a risk. Outside his window, life carried on. A mail truck rumbled by. A boy tossed a basketball against a brick wall. Somewhere, a siren wailed. Inside, John felt something give way. The painkillers sat untouched. He didn't want numbness. Not yet. He wanted to feel it all, the burn in his shoulder, the weight in his chest, the confusion that pressed behind his eyes. If this was the cost of doing the right thing, he wanted to know the full price. He turned on the television. His name was there again. Footage of the school. The playground. A grainy clip of paramedics wheeling him away, Lily's small face peeking from the crowd. The anchor spoke in reverent tones. A selfless act of bravery, hailed as a local hero. John stared at the screen like a stranger had taken over his life. A hero, they said. Yet his fridge was nearly empty, his rent overdue, and the job he'd poured his life into had vanished with a single phone call. He turned off the TV. For a long time, he sat in silence. Even Whiskers, usually bold in her demands for food, stayed curled up without a sound. Maybe she understood something had shifted. Animals often did. Evening came. Light faded from the window. Still, John hadn't moved. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps on the door. Not urgent. Not official. Just human. He opened it slowly. The hallway was empty. But on the floor lay a small envelope, hand-addressed. No name on the return. Just simple cursive. He opened it. Inside was a folded note, written in blue ink. "Thank you for saving my daughter's life. I don't have the words, but please know, we see you. We are forever grateful. Lily's mom." That was all. No money. No promises. Just truth. And somehow, it meant more than all the headlines combined. John read it twice. Then again. He placed the card on the table, right beside the untouched bottle of pills. For the first time that day, he allowed himself a breath that wasn't weighted. He was still bleeding. Still jobless. Still unsure of what tomorrow would bring. But someone had seen him. Not for what he was on paper, but for what he had done. And that mattered. The world has a strange way of noticing people only after they've bled. 3 days had passed since John Miller returned from the hospital. 3 days since he lost the job that had quietly defined his adult life. The wound on his shoulder was healing, but something else wasn't, something deeper than torn skin. At first, the attention came in trickles. A neighbor knocked on his door with a casserole and a grateful smile. A local teacher left a bouquet outside his apartment with a note. "You're the reason my niece came home safe." John appreciated the kindness, but it felt like standing in the middle of a thunderstorm with only a coat, enough to feel warm for a second, but never truly dry. Then came the knock that shifted everything. A reporter. Young, eager, with a notepad too clean to have seen much of the world. He had a camera crew in tow and a pitch in his voice that sounded rehearsed. "Mr. Miller, do you mind answering a few questions? Your story's inspiring thousands." John hesitated. He wasn't used to questions. His life had always been answers. "Fix the leak. Clean the spill. Open the gate. Show up. Do your part." Quietly. Still, he nodded. The apartment felt smaller with a camera in it. More exposed. The couch, sunken in the middle. The peeling paint on the windowsill. The shelves with secondhand books. It all became part of the story now, whether he liked it or not. The interview was short. Awkward, even. John didn't speak in sound bites. He wasn't polished. He didn't know how to go viral. He just told the truth. "I saw the girl. She couldn't move. So I did." That line, plain and unadorned, was what caught fire. Within hours, the clip spread online. First on the local station's page, then a parenting blog, then Twitter, then everywhere. Someone dug up the shaky phone footage taken during the chaos. Blurry, chaotic, but unmistakable. It showed John sprinting across the schoolyard, throwing himself over Lily just before the shot rang out. The video froze on the moment he shielded her, arms wrapped tight, a crimson bloom starting to show through his sleeve. It hit people like a punch to the chest. Comments poured in. "This man deserves a medal. He did what most of us hope we would. This is what real heroism looks like. Not actors, not athletes, him." Then came the hashtags. Hashtag Real Hero John. Hashtag Honor the Janitor. Hashtag Protect Protectors. They trended for hours. Then days. Celebrities reposted the clip. Athletes tweeted about him. Activists pointed out the irony of a man being fired for saving a life. People started asking why a man who had risked everything was now sitting at home, wounded and unemployed. John's phone rang constantly. Unknown numbers. Area codes he didn't recognize. Messages from journalists, podcast hosts, morning shows. Some wanted to feature him. Others wanted him to share his thoughts on justice. One talk show offered to fly him out that weekend and surprise him with a celebrity appearance. He stopped answering after a while. It was too much. He didn't save Lily to go on television. He didn't shield her to trend on the internet. He did it because someone had to. Still, the noise grew. A classmate of Lily shared a crayon drawing she made. John standing like a superhero, a red cape blowing in the wind, Lily smiling behind him. The caption read, "Mr. John is my hero." A teacher posted a photo of the janitor's closet, his old locker, with children's handprints painted around it. Below, someone had written in chalk, "Real heroes don't wear capes, they carry mops." The public loved it. They ate it up. The simplicity of it. The honesty. But behind the screen, John sat in the same quiet apartment, trying to stretch his remaining savings, feeding Whiskers dry kibble from a half-empty bag, and wondering what any of this meant. He wasn't working. He had no new offers. Just noise. Praise, yes, but praise doesn't pay rent. He didn't know how to ask for help. Never had. He didn't want to be pitied. What he wanted, maybe more than anything, was silence again, silence without shame. A return to a life that made sense. But there was no going back now. He was no longer invisible. Even the children outside his building, the ones who used to run past him without a glance, now stopped to wave and say, "Hey, Mr. Hero." And yet, in all the buzz and attention, the calls and coverage, only one voice cut through to his heart, Lily's. She had called once. A short voicemail, sweet and nervous. "Hi, Mr. John. I saw you on TV. My mom says you're famous now, but I already knew you were special. I miss you." That was the only call he replayed. Not the one from the journalist. Not the influencer. Not the late-night show. Just that one. Because beyond the headlines and hashtags, there was still a little girl who remembered the man who had knelt between her and a bullet. And that, for John, was the only story that mattered. The morning was quiet. John sat by the window, as he often did, watching a thin stream of sunlight break through the blinds and scatter across the floor. Whiskers curled beside him, tail twitching lazily in sleep. Outside, the world moved with the same indifference it always had. Cars hummed down the street, the corner store bell jingled faintly, and somewhere, a child's bicycle clattered over uneven pavement. The buzz of attention had not yet died down, but it was thinning, like fog after dawn. The calls came less frequently now. The hashtags still trended in pockets, but other headlines had started to push John Miller's name downward. That suited him just fine. He wasn't looking to be remembered. But on that particular morning, someone hadn't forgotten. It was the knock that pulled him back, 3 firm raps against the door. Not hurried, not hesitant, just precise. John stood slowly, his shoulders still tender beneath the bandage. He opened the door expecting another reporter, or maybe a neighbor with more well-meaning praise. But what greeted him was neither familiar nor expected. A tall man in a dark suit stood on the other side. Behind him, parked neatly at the curb, was a sleek black SUV with tinted windows and silent wheels. The man gave a polite nod. "Mr. Miller?" John nodded, uncertain. The man reached into his coat and produced a white envelope, thick, crisp, and official-looking. Pressed into the flap was a gold seal embossed with a familiar eagle. No words, just the envelope. The man handed it to John with a respectful bow of the head, then turned and walked back to the SUV. No fanfare, no explanation. The door clicked shut, and the vehicle rolled away, leaving behind only the faint scent of leather and engine heat. John stared at the envelope. His hands, still calloused from years of quiet labor, trembled as he opened it. The paper inside was smooth and heavy, the kind used only for weddings, funerals, or history. "You were cordially invited to the White House, Washington, D.C., as a guest of honor." There was more. A date, a contact number, a sentence about the president. But John's eyes paused on the words, "guest of honor." He sat down. For a long moment, he didn't move. He read it again. Then once more, slower. Honor had never come in envelopes before. He didn't cry. Not exactly. But something loosened behind his ribs, and the silence around him seemed to pulse with meaning. The next day, he wore a suit that wasn't his. It had been borrowed from a church friend who insisted it was close enough in size. It pinched at the collar and bunched oddly at the cuffs, but it was clean and blue and made him look like someone who belonged in photographs. At the airport, John shuffled quietly through the terminal, clutching his single carry-on, just a worn leather bag with a zipper that stuck. He hadn't flown in over 20 years. Security lines confused him. Boarding passes made him anxious. The plane itself felt like a miracle and a trap all at once. When the flight lifted off, John looked out the window, watching the city shrink beneath him. The streets he walked every day became threads. His apartment, his block, his corner store, all vanished into the patchwork below. He wondered if heroes felt this small when they were lifted up. Hours later, as the wheels hit the tarmac in Washington, D.C., something in him began to shift. He was no longer just the janitor. No longer just the man who had cleaned up after others, fixed what was broken, and stood quietly in the background. Now, strangers were waiting. A car met him at the airport. Another black vehicle, another silent driver. They didn't speak much. John didn't ask questions. The invitation had said enough. As the city rolled past the windows, its monuments, its marble buildings, its careful symmetry, John thought of the playground. Of Lily. Of the second that had divided his life into before and after. He thought of the moment he moved, not out of duty, but instinct. A simple act that had become something bigger than he could carry. And now, that act had echoed all the way here. He didn't know what awaited him in those halls. He didn't care about the speeches, the applause, or the photos. What mattered wasn't the ceremony. It was the fact that someone, somewhere, had seen a man like him and decided that was enough. Not because he was famous, but because he had done something right when it counted most. The vehicle slowed. The gates ahead were tall, white, unmistakable. John adjusted his borrowed collar, took a quiet breath, and stepped out, into history. John Miller never imagined he'd walk through the front doors of the White House. Yet here he was, shoulders still healing, heart thudding in quiet disbelief, as marble columns rose around him and history whispered from every corner. The air felt different here, like it carried the weight of 1,000 voices, all speaking at once. A staff member guided him through a corridor lined with portraits, faces of men who had shaped nations, carved in oil and canvas, staring down with ageless gravity. John didn't know most of their names. He'd never been much of a student of politics, but he could feel what this place meant, and that was enough. He moved quietly, almost afraid to make noise with his shoes. His suit, still borrowed, hung awkwardly on his frame. A staffer had straightened his tie for him earlier and offered him water, to which he'd nodded, unsure of what else to do. Everything felt surreal, like walking in a dream someone else had dreamt for him. As they neared the press room, the murmur of voices grew louder, reporters, aides, photographers adjusting lenses. The door opened, and the room brightened. Dozens of cameras pointed forward. Rows of press and guests filled the seats. A small stage waited under a soft spotlight. In the center, a podium with the seal of the president. John stood just off to the side, barely breathing. The room hushed as the announcer's voice rang clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." There was no fanfare, no music, just the president, stepping forward with calm purpose, nodding once as the crowd rose in a standing ovation. John felt the applause wash over him. It wasn't for fame. It wasn't for celebrity. It was something older, purer, a recognition, not of a man's title, but of his choice. The president began to speak, his voice even and measured. There are moments in our nation's story when the loudest actions come from the quietest people. Ordinary citizens who make extraordinary decisions in the blink of an eye. Today, we are honored to welcome such a man. He turned to John, a man who did not wear a uniform, who carried no weapon, who stood not in a battlefield, but in a schoolyard. And when danger appeared, he didn't run. He moved forward. John felt his breath catch. A janitor by trade, the president continued, but by deed, a symbol of what makes this country great. Humility, courage, decency. Mr. John Miller reminds us all that heroism isn't reserved for the powerful, it often belongs to the invisible. The president stepped forward and held up a small box. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a metal silver, simple, engraved with the emblem of national honor. With careful hands, the president placed it around John's neck. The room erupted in applause. Not polite, not formal. It thundered. John stood there, unsure of what to do with his hands, blinking as flashbulbs sparked like fireworks. His throat tightened. His heart raced. Then the president leaned in and said softly, "You've earned this." A staffer gestured toward the podium. John shook his head, almost instinctively. Public speaking was not part of his world. But the crowd quieted, waiting. He stepped forward. The microphone loomed like a mountain. He cleared his throat, then paused. For a moment, he thought he might turn back. Then he remembered Lily's voice on the phone, remembered the thank you card, the children waving from his building, the teachers who called him family. He took a breath. "I'm not much for speeches," he said, his voice low but steady. "I don't have big words." Silence held. "I just saw a little girl who needed help. I did what I hoped someone would do for my own child, if I had one." A hush fell deeper. "I didn't act to be called brave. I just moved. And I'd do it again." He stepped back. For a heartbeat, there was only stillness. Then, another standing ovation. Even louder than before. John lowered his head, overwhelmed. He didn't smile. Not out of coldness, but out of reverence for what had just passed. This wasn't about joy. It was about weight. About truth. When the ceremony ended, dozens came forward to shake his hand. Senators, journalists, staffers with mist in their eyes. Each thanked him. Each wanted to be near him, if only for a second. But John didn't bask in it. He accepted their gratitude quietly, just as he had accepted the broom each morning before dawn. Later, as the press room emptied and the cameras were packed away, he sat alone for a moment, metal still around his neck, staring at the seal above the podium. He had been invisible once. Now, the nation had seen him, and in the echo of applause and flash of recognition, something in him had finally begun to heal. When John Miller stepped off the plane back home, something had shifted. He noticed at first in the silence that wasn't really silence. People stared longer now, not in judgment, but in awe. A young mother nudged her son as they passed John near baggage claim. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the man." He wasn't sure how to carry that. The medal rested in a case in his bag, untouched since the ceremony. The borrowed suit was returned. The borrowed moment, however, was not. It followed him on the bus ride home, in the corner store where the clerk insisted he take his groceries for free, and in the eyes of strangers who nodded like they knew him, even if they didn't. He was no longer invisible. At first, it was disorienting. The noise, the recognition, the weight of being seen. But soon, offers came. Not just praise opportunities. A local hardware shop offered him steady work. A restaurant downtown offered him a managerial job, no interview needed. One letter came from a nonprofit focused on child safety and trauma recovery. They asked him to consider joining their outreach program, to speak with children, to simply be present. The idea stirred something in him. Then came the letter from the school. Typed, formal, apologetic. They acknowledged their misjudgment. "We acted hastily," it read. "You've always been part of the school's heart." They offered him his position back, his job, his keys, his old hours. John read it twice, then folded it, set it aside, and quietly declined. Some doors, once closed, didn't need reopening. Instead, he walked through a new one. The nonprofit welcomed him with open arms. They didn't ask him to be a counselor or a public figure. They simply asked him to sit in rooms where children struggled to find the words, to be the steady voice in chaos, to show up. That, John knew how to do. He became a quiet fixture in the center. He didn't speak much during sessions, but his presence mattered. Children gravitated to him, not because of what he'd done, but because of what he didn't do. He didn't rush them. He didn't judge. He let silence be a bridge, not a barrier. Lily visited often. Sometimes she brought drawings. Sometimes candy. Most of the time, she just sat beside him and talked about everything and nothing, how she was learning to skateboard, how she didn't like broccoli, how she couldn't sleep some nights because of the sound. John never pressed her. He just listened. They shared a bond forged not in words, but in action. She trusted him the way a child trusts a shelter in a storm. And John, in his own way, had found purpose again. Not in sweeping floors or fixing pipes, but in being exactly what someone needed when the world spun too fast. Months passed. One crisp autumn afternoon, John stood before a group of sixth graders in a community center auditorium. It was his first time speaking formally since the White House. He'd been asked to talk about courage. He didn't prepare notes. He didn't rehearse. He just looked at the kids, restless, fidgeting, some half listening, and began. Courage, he said slowly, isn't a feeling. It's a decision. A few heads turned. It's not about being fearless, he continued. It's about being scared and doing it anyway, even if no one's watching. Especially then. He told them about fear, about instinct, about how sometimes the right thing doesn't feel heroic. It just feels necessary. No dramatic storytelling. No spotlight. Just truth, delivered plainly, the way John always had. When he finished, the room was quiet. Not from disinterest, but from understanding. After the talk, one of the younger kids tugged at his sleeve. Were you scared? John looked at him and smiled. Yes, he said. But she was more scared. That's why I moved. Later that evening, John took a slow walk home. The sky was soft with twilight. The air smelled faintly of leaves and earth. As he passed the side wall of the community center, he stopped. There it was. A mural, bold and bright, stretching wide across the brick wall. It showed a man kneeling, arms protectively around a child. Not exaggerated. Not cartoonish. Just honest. The figures were unmistakable. John and Lily. Her smile wide, his expression quiet but strong. Behind them, painted in swirling color, were words that wrapped around them like a banner. Courage is doing what's right, even when the world isn't watching. He stood there for a long time. Not to admire. Not to marvel. But to remember. He had once been invisible. A man in the background. A broom in one hand, silence in the other. Now, in this new beginning, he understood something vital. You don't need the world to see you, to change the world. And sometimes, when you move without waiting, the world moves with you. Don't forget to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone. Thank you.